have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream.
In America, more than 680 streets, boulevards, and drives are named in honor of the slain civil rights leader, Martin Luther King, Jr. Except for Presidents Lincoln and Washington, more streets are named for King than any other American. Why? As a filmmaker interested in American culture, I set out to discover, do streets named for King recognize an American icon or commemorate an African-American hero?
He deserves all of the honor that one can bestow.
Already youngsters are saying,
Who?
King does represent all of us.
I mean, is it really honoring Dr. Martin Luther King? I mean, is it really?
The perception of a Martin Luther King Boulevard is in a black neighborhood is bad.
Does naming a street for King honor his legacy, or simply remind us of how far we still have to go to achieve his dream of racial equality? My journey across America begins on Martin Luther King Boulevard. The population of Eugene, Oregon is nearly 90% white. Its African-American community is less than 2%. It is one of the most recent cities in America to consider naming a street in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. The local chapter of the NAACP spearheaded the effort to rename Centennial Boulevard Martin Luther King Boulevard.
We settled on Centennial because of a number of reasons. One, a lot of African Americans, myself included, came to Eugene by way of the University of Oregon. What better place to signify that you have an African American community who actually makes money for the university than to have a street named after one of the greatest heroes ever, right here in front of the stadium, right here on this major thoroughfare.
To me, it is a legacy. I can tell you that, you know, as an African American, when I go to any city, and I travel a lot, you know, I will always end up at some point in time, you know, on Martin Luther King Boulevard. It makes you feel a little bit more welcome, a little bit more at home. And that's important.
Some white business owners on Centennial oppose changing the name. They lobbied the city council to consider other options.
Change is not a good thing when you're in business. It's a big expense. And we have the expense of letterhead, key floats, ink pens, work orders, purchase orders. There's a lot of expenses there, not just letterhead.
I mean, is it really honoring Dr. Martin Luther King? I mean, is it really? I think black or white really has nothing to do with that. It has to do with we've decided to honor this man. And so then it should be a process for the city of Eugene to decide what is the best way, which would mean all the citizens.
Because of Eugene's demographics, whites would be the ones to ultimately be deciding, would they not?
You know, whatever the issues are, this is the way that politics work, this is the way the government works, is that it affects the city, that everybody should be involved.
After a year of studying the proposal and convening 3 public forums, the city council prepared to vote.
Everybody, which side are you on? And tell which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I had a dream last night that Dr. Martin Luther King spoke to me and said, if you go down to the city council, ask them about process.
I've noticed there's two ways to do things in this country. There is the white way and the right way.
When the members of the African American community of Eugene, through an official organization like the NAACP, tell me that they have a particular way that they want to honor this great American, then that's all I need.
So do the right thing. We're watching. That concludes the public forum. Are there any councilors wishing to speak?
I've heard from people all over the community who remember when Centennial was named to celebrate the centennial of the state. and that history means something to them. So I don't think that the street belongs to any particular group. It belongs to the entire community.
Many of the citizens I've talked with have offered alternatives that are worthy of consideration. Many of those alternatives are creative and unique, just like Eugene. And I just don't think there's anything creative or unique in renaming a street.
I'm sure Dr. King himself would be talking about inclusiveness. And my perception of this process has not been community-wide inclusive process.
Better than using my own words, I'm going to quote the powerful and honest words of Dr. King himself when he talks about people who use things like process and inconvenience to circumvent doing something. First, I must confess that over the past few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice.
Please, no show of support. We will call a recess if this continues.
I thought Councilor Bettman's quote from King was excellent, but he was talking about freedom, not naming a street.
Next, are there any councilors wishing to speak? Okay, I sense we're ready to vote. The naming of Centennial Boulevard on behalf of Dr. King. Please vote. Motion fails 6-2. We're going to recess.
Although 28 people spoke in favor of the name change, the concerns of business owners and other citizens had a stronger influence on the council. With 19 streets named for U.S. presidents, why was it so difficult for the city to name one street for Martin Luther King, one of the most influential Americans in U.S. history? But as I would find in my travels across the country, naming a street for King stirs up many issues about community, history, and race relations in the United States. Chicago was the first city in the nation to name a street for Martin Luther King, Jr. In August 1968, 4 months after King's assassination, Mayor Richard Daley proclaimed that South Park Way, the main thoroughfare through Black Chicago, would be renamed Martin Luther King Drive. Naming was not without controversy.
I think it's easier to place the streets in the black community because of racism in this country. That it would somehow make any kind of substantial difference in the lives of black people in Chicago, I thought was rather absurd.
Calvin Morris, former director of the Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta, and someone who worked for King, did not support the naming of the street in Chicago.
After the assassination, this naming of this street, which was bandied about as some great event, that this was the kind of symbolic act that pointed beyond itself to a new day, a new era in race relations. I did not see it as that at that time. I certainly don't see it now in retrospect. A significant majority of white Americans believe that black people have achieved, that there should be no more efforts at civil rights because the civil rights are won. What they don't take into consideration are the subtleties of racism that continue
a major thoroughfare named for King forces people who live, work, or travel on that street to invoke Martin Luther King's name on a regular basis. I journey to the South, to the cities and towns where Dr. King struggled for the civil rights of Black Americans. Cuba, Alabama, population 363, also has a street honoring King. In Cuba, however, Martin Luther King Street is far from the center of town. Without a map, you would never find it. It is only 1,100 feet long.
Didn't mean to disturb you. This is called Martin Luther King Street?
It's the end of it.
This is the end of it? Can we talk with you a minute or two?
Talk with me?
Yeah.
What do you want to tell?
I'm all the way from New York City.
Well,
you ever been to New York?
No.
How come?
I can't even walk.
Tell me about Cuba. How's the city like?
Oh, it ain't too much to Cuba. Because Cuba's a little bit of town, you know.
That's your dog there?
Uh-huh.
You got a name?
A black dog.
Black dog, you call it? Ferocious, huh?
How do y'all find a way down here?
I got a map in the car.
Who told y'all? You know the way to Martin Luther King, didn't you? Do you have a hard time coming here? How many days did it take you?
I see you have a picture of Martin Luther King there.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of Martin Luther King?
I think he was a wonderful man. How come they killed him like that, though?
Leaving Jimmy Lee Smith and his black dog at the end of a short dirt road named for King, it is clear, for at least one man, that a street helps keep King and his dream alive. Since April 1972, St. Louis, Missouri has honored Dr. King with a street now nearly 17 miles long. But in St. Louis, Martin Luther King Drive does not go through downtown. It is not located in the center of the city. Most of it traverses the Black community.
Hi, I'm making a television documentary about Martin Luther King Drive. So I wanted to talk to you all about Martin Luther King Drive and, you know, tell me why you have all this plastic up like this and this very strange contraption.
It's easier for us to get out, get goods out without contacting anybody because it's a very bad neighborhood here. Yeah, that's why we have all these glasses and a counter. It's because it's a bad neighborhood. Even though people are friendly, but the neighborhood, there's still some bad people.
All right, dear.
23. Thank you.
Why was such a poor neighborhood chosen for Martin Luther King Drive? I went to see Norman Say, a civil rights veteran. He was instrumental in getting the street named for King.
This is the picture that I'm very, very proud of and I treasure. That's Dr. King and me. April 10th, 1972, we were able to get the street named in honor of Dr. King. It was a street that was known to African Americans. We traveled that street. We lived in and around that street. It was easier to get it because it was in the African American community.
Actually, that was the first street in the city of St. Louis named after an African American.
Now, as you drive down, you can see how this area, houses used to be along here, homes were people lived. Every place you see a vacant lot.
The first street in St. Louis named for an African American, with its burnt-out homes and abandoned businesses, has become a poor memorial to Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King Boulevard in Miami, Florida is 6.5 miles long. The city has initiated a campaign to revitalize the street.
MLK Boulevard in most cities around the country has really become the boulevard of broken dreams. And we want to change that. We want Miami to be a leader and a role model in the country to reclaim the dream that was Martin Luther King's dream. Starts on the east in an area that is predominantly a white Anglo district, and then you go into Little Haiti, you go into the African American area that we're on the border of, you go into Hialeah, which is basically a Cuban American area, and so you have this combination, this great melting pot of people that is really what Miami is about, all sharing the boulevard.
We've got about 3,200 people here working with this community, Little Haiti, trying to figure out how to make some improvements, how to make it more beautiful, and we're showing off for one day what can happen when you get a lot of people pulling together, working on one project. Doesn't make any difference what color you are, doesn't make any difference what language you speak. Today we're doing this.
Miami is a model of what streets named for King could be, linking diverse communities, bringing people together toward a common goal. But not everyone agrees with the cleanup. Bernie Dyer, former president of the Martin Luther King Development Corporation, sees things differently.
The naming for Dr. King was one thing, but inside of that, we wanted to see some real dynamic change processes started. I mean, if we really are about the business that he was about and have the agenda that he had, then we would do things to improve the life of the people who he was concerned with. And that's what I would like to see happen on these streets that's named in his honor. You know, they should be change mechanisms. You can paint and clean up and all of that stuff, but if you don't come in and really do some things to help the people in that community, you're not doing anything.
Other cities are trying to revitalize streets named for King. In Grenada, Mississippi, the city plans to widen Martin Luther King Boulevard, but the project is uprooting blacks who live and work there. Stan Freeland's family has owned businesses in the neighborhood since before the street was named in honor of King.
It took a lot to get a change to Martin Luther King Boulevard. It used to be commerce. So half of it they loved commerce, half of it they made Martin Luther King Boulevard. Of course, you know which half.
Tell me a little bit about what's going on the street.
This is a redevelopment project, and they're tearing everything down, 5-lane in the highway all the way through. They relocate everybody. There won't be many businesses left down through here, except for the ones that can afford to rebuild. This cleaners has been here for 35 years. The barbershop is on the other end. It's been there for 40 years. That's the way it is. Things gotta change. Any way you look at it, it's gotta change. But it'll still be Martin Luther King Boulevard.
The new road augurs hope for economic development. It also reminds us of the extraordinary challenges that remain and the unresolved questions about how best to embrace King's dream. With so many streets named for Martin Luther King that are derelict, depressing, and run down, it is not clear that putting King's name on a signpost really honors his legacy. In Montgomery, Alabama, there is only a short stretch of highway commemorating King, and there is great debate, even within the corridors of power, about whether or not to name a city street for King.
Here in the city of Montgomery, as you know, this is the birthplace of the civil rights movement. This is where Martin Luther King launched the Montgomery bus protest. However, in this city, there's not a street name in honor of Dr. King.
We have a lot more meaningful things here than the superficial renaming of the street. This is where he lived. We have the great fortune here in the city of Montgomery to own the house where he lived. We own the pulpit where he preached from.
I introduced a bill in the Alabama legislature to name South Jackson Street Martin Luther King Avenue.
Naming a street after Dr. King, I don't believe is the most honorable, the most noble approach to honoring his legacy. So the renaming of a street in and of itself, in my view, is not an issue of real substance.
Maybe Councilman Larkin is right. There are more creative ways to remember Martin Luther King Jr. In Atlanta, there's a National Historic Site dedicated to King's life. People come from all over the world to see the house he grew up in, the church where he first preached, and the tomb where he is buried, as well as visit the museum. This street is not named for King, but a mile or so to the west, Martin Luther King Drive begins. Dedicated in 1976, it is about 10 miles long. Pascal's Restaurant was one of the few places in Atlanta where black and white civil rights activists could eat together during the segregated 50s. Over a meal of catfish, I learned why streets named for King matter.
This is black history. Claretta King would come here and have her dinner, and all of them would meet here. They should have named Auburn Avenue Dr. King because his home was over there where he was born there, his church was over there, and everything he owned is over there.
The naming of this street here, Mother King, is significant. You understand that? It has historic, it has spiritual, because of the things that he contributed and done.
We're getting rid of some of these antebellum names. We got some names across the street. Did you know who Nathan Bedford Forrest was? Did you know him? Well, we got streets here named for Nathan Bedford Forrest, who organized the Ku Klux Klan from Indiana years ago. So there is no question about it, a desire on the part of Atlantans and other cities to try to get some of our icons in there.
The idea of naming streets for our icons, or renaming streets for icons of another era, makes vivid the idea that every group has its own set of heroes. Canton, Mississippi's population is more than 75% African American, yet it still displays remnants from the Confederacy. Which American heroes have streets promoted by the local Visitor and Convention Bureau?
We have a Kennedy Street.
You have a Kennedy Street. Do you think it's named after?
I don't think that it probably is. That's going to be more of a family name. We do have Roosevelt Street.
Do you have Roosevelt?
That would be family, I would think,
You
oriented.
think again not named after
Well,
Franklin or Teddy? What does it say there for, does it have Martin Luther King on this one?
Yes, we should. Let me get it. Yeah, Martin Luther King Drive North.
It's off of Liberty Street.
Yeah, it's off of Liberty Street.
Is it not part of the tourism? People don't come to sort of see?
Now, they do go down to Martin Luther King Drive, but that's not just, we don't have that just as one of our sites, no.
This was just a street that was just named after him. So it really doesn't have any connection that I know of.
Actually, This Canton, Mississippi street bears Martin Luther King's name for a very specific reason. It was here, in 1966, that Dr. King was tear-gassed while demonstrating during the Meredith March for Peace. But as with many of the streets named for King, its significance isn't widely known.
I'm looking for Martin Luther King Street. Do you know where that is?
I don't know where that is.
Not at all?
I don't even know where it is no more. I don't even forget what Martin Luther King Street is.
Martin Luther King Street? You heard of it?
No, sir.
No, okay, thanks.
It used to be Bessemer Avenue, it's Martin Luther King Avenue now. Like I tell you, when you go make a left right here, and you hit that bridge, make a left, go on down there to that stop sign.
If no one knows the location of the street named for King, how effective can a street be in keeping his legacy alive?
Naming of the street doesn't say anything, you know. That's just something that they wanted to do to let's say, honor the legacy of the man, but what did Dr. King actually fight for? What was his life really all about? How did he die? It's there as a reminder that the struggle goes on.
And the man came down here and gave his life, that those that's left behind would have a right to live like human beings and not slaves.
It's not just the street, it's the legacy of Dr. King, you know, that most people are interested in trying to preserve what he stood for. And all it was equality.
Equality, social, economic, racial equality, King's fight, his legacy. The street name for King in Birmingham, Alabama seems like an afterthought. Closer to downtown, the city recognizes the role of King and Birmingham in the civil rights movement with a museum. Walking through the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, I am reminded of a time when those protesting for equality in education for blacks required protection from the National Guard. When demanding the right for blacks to vote was met by batons, tear gas, police dogs, and fire hoses. That this was the cause of the civil rights movement. That this was the American movement for which King became the lead spokesperson.
Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights, meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people.
I am reminded that this is why communities seek to honor King with streets. My last stop in the South is Meridian, Mississippi, where I encounter rap artist Baby Ray.
Right here, we're standing on Martin Luther King Drive, and basically every city has one to dedicate to him, but I feel like people don't really value exactly where they stay, you know, and then, you know, a lot of times, a lot of Martin Luther King Drives end up in, you know, black neighborhoods or whatnot. A lot of young people of my age have got sidetracked, and it's not saying that they don't have the boldness to fight the way Martin Luther King fought, but it's just the fact that they don't have the focus. They're not focused. I thank God that I had grandfathers or grandmother to really show me what I was fighting for, and being able to learn my history and appreciate my history. You bring some black child up here, they wouldn't even know this, and they need to know this. But you got their mama, their dad, they don't really state those facts to them because they really didn't know, or they didn't pay attention. They really didn't know what they were fighting for. You gotta know what you're fighting for.
America's heartland, a Midwestern community fights to name a street for King. In 1980, Muncie, Indiana designated a highway overpass Martin Luther King Boulevard. But for many, that wasn't enough. Since early 2003, Randall Sims, a community leader, has led the fight to name another street, one that is more prominent and closer to the black community, Martin Luther King Boulevard.
There's a lot of people live here didn't even know that we had a Martin Luther King Boulevard. You know, it's so hidden, and then it borders what we call, or what has been called Shed Town, which, you know, is the white area that, you know, in the past harbored a lot of racial tension. You know, I mean, they call themselves honoring Dr. King in this way, but it's a dishonor. We'll be off of it in a minute, so don't blink too many times. And there's a sign back there. That's where I cut the coon down from. Somebody had put coon up there, K-O-O-N, with some stick-on letters, so they just peeled the letters off and left it like it was. Us as black people around Muncie, you know, we, you know, very seldom go to the city council or the mayor asking for anything, you know, but I mean, this time we you know, we're gonna stand on what we asking for.
As Warehouse starts Broadway, we have for years. My customers are not going to understand Ed's Warehouse and Martin Luther King Boulevard. They're going to say, where on that street did he move to? I guess from their standpoint, they're looking at it like, well, what does it matter? It's just a street and it's not hurting anything. But we look at it differently. And it's not a black and white issue. I don't care. I don't want it named Ed McLeod.
Which is more important, the community's desire to rename Broadway Martin Luther King Boulevard, or the concerns of the business owners on the street? Muncie's mayor is responsible for mediating the conflict.
We have a street here named after Dr. Martin Luther King that I do not feel like is inappropriate. It is a small street. It's in the side of town that does not front on the African American community. So I agreed that there needed to be something more significant named after Dr. King. But I did not support right then just the wholesale renaming of Broadway to Dr. Martin Luther King because of all the issues that have been raised by business owners. And the main thing was there was not a consensus built.
I don't think they took into account how businesses are affected by an address change. I talked to the postmaster several times about it, and when the first time I contacted him, the comment he said was, it will be overwhelming. It will be as if each business on Broadway has picked up and moved across town, because they will have to notify every customer, every client, every vendor, everybody they do business with, that their address has changed.
I think as a community, white people maybe do not understand the historical significance to an African American of Dr. King. We understand his history. We understand what we think he stood for. We understand his struggles. But I don't think that we understand, to an African American, you know, how they look upon and how high of regard they put Dr. King.
Members of the black community gathered to discuss strategy for renaming Broadway.
And let me remind you, Dr. King went to jail. And we may have to go to jail. So let's don't say we won't go to jail. Because civil disobedience means disobedience now. So if you're not willing to go to jail, you may not be ready for this fight, because it's not going to be easy. We are fighting some of the most racist people in the world in Muncie, Indiana.
Yes, we want Broadway changed to Martin Luther King Boulevard, but that's only a tip of the iceberg, you know. We using this also to shed some light on some other issues in this city, which there's plenty of. There's racial issues in this city. There's police harassment issues in this city. Job opportunities that need to be opened up in this city. You know, our community is on trial. We're going to continue the fight. We're going to go on with this thing to a conclusion. and the conclusion that we want.
The community meeting reveals that the movement to rename Broadway in honor of King attracts more than just members of the black community. Many of the white faces in the room are local college students. I joined them for dinner at the home of their professor.
Shoot, I'm out of here! The discussion of the street name being changed and this whole process has brought race discussions out into the open, and I think that's really valuable.
I mean, we've all talked to people. We all, have both been told and seen areas where the black community has just been disrespected, kind of shoved out to the side. Does not really have a big say in Muncie, and this is kind of a first step.
Steps are important because I know, and also morale-wise, it's important because let's say you don't get the MLK Boulevard. What else do you have? But if you get a step, you know what I'm saying?
Changing the street name is a small step. What other things are the black people in Muncie up against? Poverty, not having enough black teachers. We have such bigger issues. A street name is a small step. To me, a street name is a small step.
Say that the African American community wins. What else can they win? I mean, as soon as they flex their muscle, as soon as they're galvanized into an actual force, what else can happen?
These students, they're immensely conscious and deeply sophisticated about the kind of democracy that we live in. That we live in a place where if you don't have money, you don't have wealth, you don't have power, you don't matter. But I think there are other levels to this. There's a level of leadership. There's a level of the future of the African American community, the future of race relations in Muncie.
People feel like nothing will ever change around here. And that was one of the reasons why I started this. Black people have become complacent and just feel like, ain't nothing we can do. Once the people see that, okay, we got this done, then the morale is going to rise. And, people going to feel like we can get something done.
If I'm the owner, and they do change the name of this to Martin Luther King Boulevard, I will close this store. That will happen.
Typically it's a little headstrong or stubborn or...
Now see? Now quit thinking like a black man. Here.
I am black.
I know you are, but I'm trying to change you over here. Martin Luther King, we have a national holiday, don't we? Huh? Okay. We have a street named Martin Luther King for 15 years. And that's not enough. We're going to change the street, regardless of what the whites think. And I believe this is wrong. I just can't help but think, hey, you're going too far.
The opposition from the businesses on Broadway galvanizes Randall to organize a unity rally along the street.
Getting ready. My daughters can do a better job than I'm doing. We let everybody know about the line of unity. I think that's good. We just want it to be a show of support, mainly to show us that we can come together for a cause. This is an extra large.
Okay, there you go.
All right, we're going to get started.
All right. We're making history here today. This is history. And we're glad everybody that came out wanted to be a part of this history. When I wrote down a quote here, and Dr. King said, if we protest or demonstrate courageously, yet with dignity and love, the historians will say there lived a great people, a people who injected new meaning and dignity into the veins of civilization. That's our challenge, And that's our overwhelming responsibility. And that's why we're here today.
Although the Muncie City Council has already voted against renaming Broadway, 100 protesters marched down the street, acting out King's guiding principle of nonviolent protest. Randall's assertion that the fight is about more than just a street, that it's a fight for racial, social, and economic equality, is perhaps the truest representation of King's legacy.
MLK! On Broadway! MLK! On Broadway! MLK! On Broadway! MLK! On Broadway!
Who would have thought that a street sign could generate so much controversy? Whether we embrace or reject the idea of a street name for King, reading his name on a street sign compels us to ask, who was Dr. King? What did he do? What did he stand for? After 2 days of letters, phone calls, scathing editorials, and embarrassing headlines, the Eugene City Council reconsidered their original vote not to rename Centennial Boulevard. Scott Bartlett, a community activist, kept a record of the events.
Black leaders feel let down by decision on street name. They say they're not interested in alternatives to renaming Centennial Boulevard. 2 days later, this was Eugene's equivalent of a nuclear bomb. Clueless in Eugene, council members just don't get it. They don't grasp the importance of honoring King to blacks. The only way out of this swamp is the path by which the council entered. I was reading this Wednesday morning about 7 o'clock. 5 hours later, about noon, at the noon meeting, they began the reversal.
I know this is pretty unusual, but at some point during this meeting, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider a vote at our previous meeting, which is to adopt an ordinance concerning the change of street name of Centennial Boulevard to Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard.
Okay. All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Those opposed. Motion carries 5-3.
It just blew the doors off the city council in a way. These editorials were highly instrumental. It will be King Boulevard after all.
The events in Eugene prove that streets named for Martin Luther King are important, not just because they honor a great American, but because they engage us all. They expose our attitudes about race. They reveal how we see each other. And they put a continually evolving face on the state of race relations in America.
Race is still a very, very significant issue in this country. We are living two totally different experiences. If you've never experienced racism, a lot of times you're not going to be able to identify it.
I think that this issue really did stir the community in ways that we have remained unstirred. I think that that was eye-opening to a lot of people.
I've always looked at this as a teachable moment. Would Dr. King want this sort of a process? Would he really want asphalt commemorating him? And my response to that, I think Dr. King would have loved the conversation. I think he would have wanted us to engage in the conversation and then come to some amenable outcome.